When the empath ceases to play the role assigned by the narcissist, an ancient drama begins to unravel, a drama older than the stories of gods and mortals. For every relationship of this sort is not merely a personal misfortune or a chance encounter of wounded souls. It is an enactment of archetypal energies that dwell beneath the threshold of consciousness. The narcissist is not only an individual with fragile vanity and grandiose self-constructions, but also the living embodiment of a psychic figure, an actor on the stage of the collective unconscious, and the empath, who has long surrendered their vitality to sustain this fragile edifice, is likewise not merely a sensitive soul, but a carrier of archetypal sacrifice, one who gives endlessly to keep the other alive in illusion. The moment the empath stops playing along is the moment the mask begins to crack, and when the mask cracks, the gods behind the mask stir. To understand what the narcissist becomes when deprived of their empathic counterpart, one must first recognize that the narcissist is a construct built upon a wound. At the core of the narcissist lies not strength, but abyss, the grandiose facade, the gestures of superiority, the charm, the seduction. All these are scaffolds erected around an inner void, and as long as the empath supplies the steady nourishment of attention, understanding, forgiveness, and sacrifice, the void remains hidden behind the mask. The empath is like the priest or priestess who daily tends the sacred flame that prevents darkness from engulfing the temple. The narcissist requires the empath's gaze, as a mirror requires light, for without it they cannot see themselves. But when the empath withdraws, the mirror darkens, and the narcissist is left face to face with a horror too long denied their own unreflected emptiness. In mythological language, we might say the empath plays Persephone, abducted into the underworld, feeding the king of shadows with her presence. The narcissist is Hades, enthroned in darkness, powerful only as long as Persephone accepts her role. Yet what happens when Persephone refuses to remain in the underworld? What happens when she rises again toward the light, choosing her own, becoming over his dominion? Hades is then dethroned, not by violence, but by abandonment. He becomes once more a lonely god among shadows, stripped of the warmth that gave him borrowed life. This is why the narcissist often rages or collapses. When the empath withdraws, they are confronted not only with the loss of supply, but with the archetypal annihilation of their identity. But let us not mistake the narcissist for a mere villain. They are also victim of their own wound. The narcissist was once a child who, at some decisive moment, was denied the possibility of being seen as they truly were. They became an actor in their own life, constructing a persona of brilliance or dominance to conceal the rejected vulnerability within. The empath, with their boundless receptivity, becomes the audience that sustains this play. To stop playing along is to extinguish the theater lights. The narcissist then faces the unbearable silence of an empty hall. In such silence, the shadow rises. They may become vindictive, desperate, or seek new empaths to enthrone them again. But beneath these frantic gestures is always the trembling child, the abandoned archetype of innocence, the inner orphan who never found a witness, the empath, to undergoes a transformation. For to cease playing along is not simply an act of withdrawal, but an awakening. The empath recognizes that their endless giving was not love, but compulsion, an unconscious attempt to heal in the other what they could not yet face within themselves. Often, the empath's sacrifice emerges from their own shadow, the belief that only through self-erasure will they be worthy of love. To stop is to confront their own wound of invisibility, and in this confrontation, they rediscover their own archetypal power. They are no longer Persephone bound in the underworld, but Demeter calling her daughter back to life. They are no longer the sacrificial lamb, but the awakened seer who recognizes the narcissist's mask for what it is, a mask and nothing more. Thus, when the empath stops playing, the narcissist becomes a wanderer in their own labyrinth, deprived of the guiding thread of external validation. They confront the Minotaur within the beast of despair, the shame and unmet truth. Some will rage and accuse, seeking to rebind the empath with guilt. Others will collapse into depression, unable to sustain the grandiose architecture alone. Still others will flee toward new empaths, desperate to recreate the theater. But in every case, the mask grows heavier, for each departure of an empath is like another mirror shattering, leaving the narcissist increasingly surrounded by shards of their own unreflected image. The more they try to hold together the persona, the more the unconscious presses from below, demanding recognition. The narcissist, without the empath, is forced to stand at the threshold of individuation. Though rarely do they walk through it willingly, dreams reveal this drama with uncanny clarity. Patients who embody narcissistic wounds often dream of vast houses collapsing, of mirrors that no longer reflect, of stages where the audience has vanished. They dream of children crying behind locked doors, of faceless crowds turning away, of voices calling in the darkness but never answered. Such images are not mere fantasies. They are the psyche's attempt to reveal the truth. They show the soul's longing for wholeness, even as the conscious ego clings to its illusions without the empath to shield them. These dreams become louder, more insistent, until the narcissist either heeds them or sinks further into defense. What they become then depends not on the empath's absence alone, but on whether they dare to confront the archetypal figures rising from their own depths. For those of you who listen, you may recognize yourselves in either role. Perhaps you have given endlessly, believing it was love, until your soul was drained. Or perhaps you have demanded endlessly, believing it was survival, until your world collapsed. These are not roles chosen consciously, but destinies enacted by archetypes moving through human lives. The task is to awaken, to see, to withdraw projection and reclaim the shadow. When the empath ceases to play, it is not only the narcissist who faces transformation. The empath, too, must bear the pain of individuation, the loneliness of no longer being defined by another's need, but out of that loneliness arises a deeper encounter with the self, the true center that was hidden beneath the compulsions of giving and taking. This is why the drama of narcissist and empath is never merely interpersonal. It is a revelation of the collective psyche, of the eternal dance between shadow and mask, wound and healer, false self and true self. To witness it and to endure its unraveling is to step into the mystery of transformation. For what the narcissist becomes when the empath stops playing is not only a figure of despair, but also potentially the beginning of a new humanity within them. They may resist, they may collapse, they may lash out, but the seed of awakening has been planted. Whether it grows depends upon whether they can finally look into the abyss without turning away. And so I say to you, do not despise the narcissist, nor idealize the empath. See them as mirrors of each other, as actors in a drama that reveals the deepest wounds of the soul. And if you are caught in such a bond, know that the breaking of the play is not an end, but an initiation. It is the tearing of the veil, the descent into the shadow, the call to reclaim your own soul. For when the empath stops playing, the narcissist may rage, collapse, or wander, but beneath it all, both are being summoned toward the same truth, that no one can save another by self-erasure, and that no mask can forever conceal the child within who longs to be seen. When the empath withdraws their participation, the psychic economy that sustained the narcissist collapses like an empire that has lost its tribute, for the narcissist does not live from within but from without. They are like a ruler who collects taxes to maintain a palace built on shifting sands. Without the empath, without the tributary stream of affirmation, of attention, of sacrifice, the palace crumbles. And yet, herein lies the mystery. In the ruins of this collapse, there is the potential for something genuine to emerge, for the false self is like a fortress wall, and only when it cracks can the hidden prisoner within what I call the true self find the possibility of release. The narcissist without the empath often becomes restless, haunted, frantic, like an addict deprived of their drug. They tremble in the void of withdrawal. They may lash out in fury, for anger is easier to bear than despair. They may project blame upon the empath, painting them as betrayer or villain. For projection shields the ego from seeing its own emptiness. But beneath these surface eruptions lies a more profound truth. The narcissist is encountering the shadow that has long been avoided. In that shadow waits the child who was not loved, the soul who was unseen, the voice that was silenced. When the empath stops playing, that voice begins to whisper again, first faintly, then with unbearable insistence. This moment is one of great danger, but also great possibility. It is danger because the narcissist's defenses are fragile. And without the empath, to uphold them. They may collapse into despair so deep that annihilation feels near. But it is possibility, because only through such collapse does the false facade become unsustainable. Individuation, the process of becoming whole, often begins not with triumph, but with ruin. It begins when the tower falls, when the mask shatters, when the old strategies no longer work. If the narcissist can endure this abyss without fleeing into new illusions, then the archetype of rebirth can stir, like the phoenix rising from its own ashes. Consider the myths of death and resurrection that humanity has told across all ages. Osiris dismembered, only to be reassembled. Christ crucified, only to rise. Inanna descending to the underworld, stripped of all garments, only to return transformed. The narcissist, abandoned by the empath, is likewise stripped of their garments, the garments of grandiosity, charm, seduction, superiority. Naked, they stand before the underworld, judges of their own unconscious. And though many resist, some are forced to bow, to encounter the darkness within. In this descent lies the possibility of authentic life, for as long as the empath sustains the masquerade, the narcissist has no reason to seek their own soul. But when the empath ceases, the descent becomes inevitable. And yet, let us not overlook the transformation of the empath, for to stop playing is not simply an act of rebellion against the narcissist. It is a journey into their own shadow. The empath has long believed that their value lies in giving, that their purpose is to be a vessel for the other's need. They are like a well that pours itself out endlessly, believing that emptiness is holiness. But when they stop, they are confronted with their own neglected self. They begin to realize that their sacrifice was often rooted not in true compassion, but in fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of being unworthy. The empaths must face their own shadow of dependency, the hidden belief that their light has no value unless reflected in another's eyes. In breaking free, they reclaim their own center. They begin to draw from the source within, rather than dissipating their essence into the abyss of another's need. Dreams of empaths at this stage often carry images of liberation, doors opening after long confinement, rivers breaking through dams, wings unfolding. They dream of reclaiming lost objects, of finding hidden children, of encountering guiding figures who lead them to mountains or seas. Such images are symbols of the self, of the psychic center, calling them toward wholeness. For the empath who ceases to play is no longer merely a giver. They become a seeker, one who turns inward to discover the true ground of their being. And in doing so, they force the narcissist to confront the same demand, though the narcissist may resist it with every fiber of their being. In this way, the empath's act of withdrawal is not only personal but archetypal. It is the moment when the archetype of the victim transforms into the archetype of the hero. The empath ceases to be the passive vessel and becomes the active agent of their own destiny. This is why the narcissist often experiences the empath's withdrawal as betrayal of cosmic proportions. It is not merely the loss of a person, but the loss of their own reflection, the shattering of their godlike illusion. They are dethroned not by an enemy, but by the awakening of their subject. And like any dethroned monarch, they may rage, they may cling, they may seek revenge, yet the archetypal truth is clear. The throne was never theirs, for it belonged to the self all along. Imagine a dream in which the narcissist is depicted as a king whose mirror is shattered in the fragments. Instead of his own glorious face, he sees the faces of children crying, of animals wounded, of shadows rising from graves. This is the dream that awaits them when the empath leaves. It is a dream of confrontation, of the unconscious demanding recognition. The narcissist, once sustained by external supply, now faces the inexorable demand to supply themselves, to turn inward, to find within that which they sought without. Many fail, seeking instead to recreate the old pattern with new empaths, but for some, the repeated collapse forces a deeper awakening, a painful but transformative encounter with the soul. The empath likewise dreams of ascending staircases, of climbing mountains, of finding forgotten gardens. These are not mere fantasies, but revelations of their true journey. They are being led toward individuation, toward the realization that their sensitivity is not a curse but a gift, not for others to exploit, but for themselves to embody. The empath who awakens ceases to be prey and becomes prophet. They no longer give to be loved. They love because they are whole. In this transformation lies the true power that ends the narcissist's reign, for the empath no longer participates in the drama of wound and illusion. They become, in Jungian terms, aligned with the self, the archetype of totality, the guiding star of the soul. Thus, when we ask what the narcissist becomes when the empath stops playing, we must answer with paradox. They become, on the one hand, a wanderer stripped of illusions, lost in their own labyrinths. They may become more desperate, more manipulative, more broken, but they also become potentially an initiate on the path of individuation, forced at last to confront what they have long denied. The empath, too, becomes paradox, once a victim, now a sovereign, once a giver, now a whole being who gives from fullness rather than compulsion. Together, their separation becomes a symbolic drama of death and rebirth, of shadow and self, of mask and truth. And so I tell you, do not fear the breaking of such bonds. Do not cling to roles that drain your soul, for in the breaking lies the possibility of new life for both. If you are the empath, your withdrawal is not cruelty, but necessity. If you are the narcissist, your collapse is not annihilation, but initiation. Each is being called toward wholeness. Though by different roads, the empath finds the self by withdrawing projection. The narcissist finds the self by enduring the loss of reflection. Both roads are steep, both are painful, but both lead toward the same hidden treasure, the discovery of who you truly are, beyond the roles you once played. There comes a moment in the psychic life of both the empath and the narcissist, when the masks they have worn begin to burn in the fire of truth. For too long, the empath has been the mirror, bending themselves into shapes that reflected back the fragile grandeur of the other. For too long, the narcissist has lived within that mirror, mistaking the reflection for reality. When the mirror is withdrawn, the narcissist faces the terror of non-existence, and the empath faces the terror of self-existence. Both terrors are profound, for they touch the deepest layers of the soul. The empath, accustomed to dissolving into another's need, must learn the weight of their own being. The narcissist, accustomed to feeding upon that dissolution, must learn the unbearable art of self-confrontation. In this crucible, both are summoned into shadow work, for only in the shadow lies the path to wholeness. The shadow is not the enemy, it is the hidden twin. It is the part of the psyche that has been denied, repressed, cast into darkness, because it did not fit the mask we presented to the world. The narcissist shadow is their vulnerability, their hunger for unconditional love, their unbearable shame. The empath's shadow is their suppressed power, their anger at being used, their secret desire to be recognized as whole. When the empath stops playing, the shadows of both are released. For the narcissist, the absence of reflection allows the orphaned child within to cry out. For the empath, the refusal to give endlessly forces the suppressed lion within to roar. Both shadows, once hidden, now emerge, demanding recognition archetypally. This is the moment of the descent into the underworld. For every individuation journey begins with such a descent. The narcissist descends into the cavern of their own emptiness, encountering ghosts of abandonment and rejection. They may dream of wandering through endless corridors, of searching for faces that turn away, of carrying masks that crumble in their hands. The empath descends into the cave of their own denied strength, encountering serpents that hiss, "You have no right to exist," only to discover that the serpents are guardians of treasure. They may dream of retrieving swords from rivers, of uncovering jewels from the earth, of embracing animals once feared. These are not random images, but archetypal symbols. The sword is the power of differentiation. The jewel is the hidden self. The animal is the instinct reconciled. The psyche communicates through symbol. And in these symbols, both empath and narcissist are shown the way to transformation. But the process is rarely smooth. The narcissist, faced with the abyss, may resist violently. They may cling to old strategies, seeking new empaths to restore the illusion. They may rage at the one who withdrew, demanding their return, attempting to bind them with guilt. They may even collapse into despair, whispering of meaninglessness, for the loss of external supply feels like psychic death. And in truth, it is a death, the death of the false self, Few can endure it willingly, for to do so requires a courage rarely cultivated. Yet, if they do not endure it, they remain prisoners of repetition, trapped in an endless cycle of mirrors that always shatter. The narcissist, without the empath, is like a mythic king dethroned, stripped of power, wandering among ruins. They may become bitter, or they may become humble. The choice is theirs, but the path is narrow. The empath, to resist, to stop playing means to accept loneliness, to stand without the familiar role of savior or healer. It means to feel the hunger of their own soul, which has long been ignored. Many empaths are tempted to return, to re-enter the underworld, because the silence of selfhood feels unbearable. But if they persist, they begin to feel the stirring of a new strength. They realize that their gift of sensitivity is not meant to be squandered on appeasement, but to be directed toward authentic creativity, toward love that arises from fullness rather than depletion. In Jungian terms, they begin to withdraw their projections, to see the narcissist not as the one who needs saving, but as the one who reflects their own shadowed wound. And in doing so, they reclaim their power. Here we find the archetype of the wounded healer. The empath has given endlessly because they have sought to heal in others the wound they themselves carried. They have tried to heal their own invisibility by making others visible, but when they stop, they turn the healing inward. They become paradoxically both healer and healed. The narcissist, too, if they endure the abyss, may awaken as a wounded healer of another kind, one who transforms shame into compassion, one who recognizes that true strength is born not from domination but from vulnerability, embraced. But for this to occur, the collapse must be endured, the shadow must be faced. This drama is universal, and it appears in myths and fairy tales across cultures. Consider Beauty and the Beast. The beast is a narcissistic figure, terrifying, demanding, imprisoned in a castle of his own projections. Beauty is the empath, drawn into his world, giving her presence to sustain him. When she withdraws, when she leaves the castle, the beast collapses, seemingly dying, and yet it is in that collapse that transformation occurs. The beast becomes a man, the mask falls away, and the true self emerges. But notice, the transformation is not caused by beauty's endless sacrifice, but by her withdrawal, her return to her own truth. The archetype is clear. The empath's refusal to play sustains not cruelty but rebirth. Or take the myth of Inanna, who descends to the underworld, stripped of all her garments at each gate until she stands naked before the Queen of Shadows. Inanna dies, and only through descent is she reborn. The empath who ceases to play undergoes a similar stripping of roles, of illusions, of compulsions, until they stand naked before their own soul. And the narcissist, abandoned, undergoes the same descent. Though often unwillingly, each is confronted with the underworld queen, who is none other than the shadow demanding recognition. To resist is to remain dead. To accept is to rise transformed. It is here, in this archetypal descent, that the psychological depth of Jung's vision reveals itself, for these dramas are not merely interpersonal conflicts, but movements of the collective unconscious through individual lives. The empath-narcissist bond is a ritual of projection and reflection, a sacred but dangerous dance in which both are invited to confront what they have hidden. The breaking of the dance is thus a sacred event, a rupture that opens the door to individuation. It is painful, yes, but it is also initiation. The empath awakens to their own power. The narcissist confronts their own vulnerability. Each, if they endure, becomes more whole. And yet, you may ask, what happens to the narcissist who cannot endure, who refuses the call? They may become more hollow, more bitter, more desperate. They may flee from mirror to mirror, consuming and discarding empath in endless repetition. They may live in denial until the end, refusing the shadow, clinging to the mask. But even here, the unconscious does not abandon them. Dreams, symptoms, breakdowns, all these are the psyche's attempts to force recognition. The self is relentless, and though many resist, some are eventually broken open, even in despair, for no one can escape the call of the self forever. And what of the empath who cannot sustain the withdrawal, who returns again and again to the underworld? They may become addicted to sacrifice, confusing it with love. They may wither in silence, believing themselves unworthy outside the drama. But here, too, the psyche intervenes. Illness, depression, dreams of captivity, all press them toward awakening. And when they finally hear, they step into their own sovereignty. They realize that compassion is not the same as self-erasure, that love is not martyrdom, but presence, that to be whole is to give from fullness, not from wound. This is the true liberation, the archetypal gift of individuation. So when I say that the narcissist becomes something new, when the empath stops playing, I mean not only collapse, but potential. They become what they most fear: empty, unreflected, alone. But in that emptiness lies the seed of authenticity. They may become crueler, or they may become more human. They may rage, or they may weep. They may cling, or they may surrender. But beneath it all, they are being summoned to meet the child within, the wound at the center, the lost self that longs for integration. And the empath, in chasing, becomes not betrayer but liberator, both of themselves and, paradoxically, of the narcissist. For only in absence does the mask become unbearable. This, then, is the mystery, that the end of the play is the beginning of truth. The empath who steps away, steps into their own soul. The narcissist who loses supply faces the abyss of their own being. And though the abyss is dark, it is also fertile. For in Jung's words, the gold is always in the shadow. And only when the mirror shatters do we see not the illusion but the light breaking through. There is a silence that follows the breaking of the old pattern. A silence so profound that at first it feels like death. For the empath, it is the death of the role they have played for so long, the role of savior, of healer, of perpetual giver. For the narcissist, it is the death of the reflected self, the shattering of the mirror in which they saw their godlike image. Both feel bereft, abandoned, emptied, and yet this silence is not sterile. It is the silence of the womb before birth, the silence of the soil before the seed breaks open. In this silence, the self stirs, calling each one into a deeper becoming. For the drama of empath and narcissist, though painful, is ultimately a summons to the sacred journey of individuation. Individuation is not comfort, it is fire. It burns away the false, the masks, the compulsions, the shadows we have disowned. For the narcissist, individuation demands the courage to face shame, to meet the child within who was once unseen, to embrace the vulnerability that they have denied with such ferocity. Without the empath's gaze to sustain the illusion, the narcissist must learn to see themselves not as grandiose, not as worthless, but as human. And to be human is to be both wound and wonder, both shadow and light. The path is arduous, for it demands they relinquish the intoxication of control, the comfort of illusion, the endless hunger for supply. But if they accept, they may discover something infinitely greater, the presence of the self, the inner wholeness that does not depend on mirrors, that is eternal and indestructible. For the empath, individuation demands another kind of courage. The courage to exist in fullness, to claim their own power, to no longer dissolve into another's need. It demands that they face the loneliness of standing alone, that they confront the shadow of their own anger, that they integrate the strength they have long disowned. The empath must learn that compassion without boundaries is not love, but sacrifice unto death. They must reclaim the archetype of the sovereign, the one who governs their own soul, and in doing so, they discover that their sensitivity is not weakness but vision, not a burden, but a gift to be shared freely, not compulsively. They, too, find the self not as the one who saves others, but as the one who lives authentically from their own center. It is here, in the union with the self, that both empath and narcissist encounter the sacred. For the self is not merely psychological, it is archetypal, transpersonal, a symbol of the divine within. It appears in dreams, as a mandala, as a wise old man or woman, as a child of radiant light, as a guiding star. It is the axis around which the psyche revolves, the hidden center that whispers through every wound and every longing. The narcissist, stripped of mirrors, may dream of a child leading them out of a dark forest, of a jewel glowing in a cave, of a sun rising after endless night. The empath, freed from compulsion, may dream of standing on a mountain, of drinking from a clear spring, of embracing an inner twin long forgotten. These images are not inventions, they are revelations of the self, calling each soul into wholeness. Do you see now why the breaking of this bond is sacred? It is not merely the collapse of a toxic pattern, but the tearing of a veil. It is the initiation into deeper truth. When the empath ceases to play, they force the narcissist to confront their own emptiness. When the narcissist loses supply, they force the empath to confront their own fullness. Each is compelled to face what they most fear. One fears emptiness. The other fears existence, and yet in these fears lie the gateways to transformation. For the void is not nothingness, but the space where the true self can be born, and existence is not abandonment, but the realization of one's eternal worth. In the alchemical texts, this stage is described as nigredo, the blackening, the dissolution of all that was false. The narcissist undergoes nigredo when their mask collapses and they are left with the raw darkness of their unhealed wound. The empath undergoes nigredo when their endless giving dies and they are left in the silence of their own soul. It is a time of despair, of confusion, of loss, but alchemy teaches that from nigredo arises albedo, the whitening, the purification, and then rubedo, the reddening, the birth of new life. The old dies, but in the crucible of death, the gold is formed. This is the mystery of transformation, that only in collapse does the true treasure emerge. Therefore, I tell you, do not fear the collapse. Do not cling to the old drama. Let the mask fall. Let the role die. For only then can you discover the self, the wholeness that was waiting beneath. The narcissist may rage, the empath may weep, but both are being guided by forces greater than themselves. Forces that have moved through myths and dreams since the dawn of humanity. This is not merely psychology, it is initiation. It is the work of the soul, and when the work is done, though, it is never truly done, for individuation is lifelong. Something extraordinary occurs. The narcissist, if they endure, becomes not the tyrant, but the wounded healer, one who knows the depths of shame and therefore can hold the pain of others with compassion. The empath, if they endure, becomes not the martyr, but the sovereign, one who knows the depth of love and therefore can give without losing themselves. Together, they embody the union of opposites, the reconciliation of shadow and light. This is the true alchemy, the sacred marriage, the conjunctio. It is the birth of the self, but remember, this is not guaranteed. Many refuse the call. Many flee from shadow to shadow, from mask to mask. Many cling to the old roles until death. Yet the possibility remains, for the self is relentless. and it calls each of us in ways we cannot escape. Through dreams, through symptoms, through failures, through collapses, it whispers, become who you are, become whole, become true. So if you find yourself in this drama, whether as empath or as narcissist, hear this. The breaking is not the end, but the beginning. Do not fear the silence that follows. Do not rush to fill it with new illusions. Wait, listen, descend. For in the descent, you will find a treasure. In the shadow, you will find the gold. And when you rise, you will rise not as mask, not as role, but as self. You will know that your worth is not in reflection nor in sacrifice, but in the eternal light within, and that light, once found, cannot be extinguished. Thus, when the empath stops playing, the narcissist becomes what they have always feared and always needed. A soul stripped bare before the truth, and the empath becomes what they have always longed for and always denied. A soul radiant in its own sovereignty. Both are called, through pain and loss, into wholeness, and in that wholeness they discover what was hidden all along, that the drama was never punishment, but initiation, never curse, but path, never prison, but doorway, and the doorway leads not back into the old pattern, but forward into the eternal mystery of becoming